Hello and welcome to Impact Factor. I'm your host, Katie Van Aken, and I'm here to talk about some tips and tricks for surviving your PhD. This week, I'm going to cover some tips for starting your program off on the right foot, including building a good relationship with your advisor and setting a balanced work schedule. So let's get into it. So it's your first week of grad school, which is filled with orientations, paperwork, and meetings. One of the most important things to think about early on is what you want your work schedule to look like. I know many students who have treated it just like they would a full-time job. They would get in at 9 and leave at 5, which, by the way, set them up nicely for transitioning to a job post-PhD. On the other hand, you may want to take advantage of the flexibility that the academic world offers and shift your day a little bit later. I also knew some students who were known to come in as late as noon unless they had morning meetings. I usually fell somewhere in between. I had a pretty busy schedule outside of my PhD, so my schedule was not very consistent, but I was okay with that. Of course, you should find out what the expectations are from your advisor by asking them, and also talking to other members of the lab. But regardless of what your desired schedule is, try not to fall into the habit of burning the midnight oil right off the bat. What do I mean by that? Well, if you set a standard of working 12-hour days and being available 24/7 to both your advisor and lab mates, they will expect this of you for the next 5 years. Definitely aim to impress your colleagues, but try to do it with the kind of work instead of the amount of work. Establishing a healthy and balanced work schedule can be the difference between surviving and burning out. Your PhD is a marathon, and if you start a marathon at a full sprint, you won't have enough left at the end. So pace yourself. The second thing that deserves a lot of attention when you first start is your relationship with your advisor. You may remember from episode 1 that there are different types of programs that assign you an advisor at different stages. Sometimes you join a lab group right away, and sometimes you rotate to different ones within your first year. But this topic remains true for whenever you first join a group and are developing that working relationship with your advisor. Tip number 1. Establish yourself early on as reliable, motivated, and a good communicator. The easiest thing to do to make yourself look good is to quickly respond to emails. Even if you don't have an answer or will need to spend some time looking into it, a quick response will let your advisor know that you are on top of it. Then, once you follow through with the request in a reasonable time frame, you will establish yourself as someone who is reliable. Tip number 2. Have a discussion early on about expectations. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen students make is forgetting that their advisor is also their boss. Even though they are your advocate and are mentoring you toward your degree, you also work for them and shouldn't have to read their mind or live in a state of always wondering what they want. Ask them up front what kind of expectations they have. For example, do you have an expectation of hours I should be available for? Or can I work late at night if that works better for me? How regularly do you want to meet and discuss my project? Should I prepare anything for these meetings? I would really like to graduate in 5 years. Do you think that's possible? And if so, what should I do to set myself up for success in that way? Or what's the best way to get in touch with you when you're traveling or not on campus? I'm sure there are tons more questions and things that are worth discussing early on. But the moral here is that the benefits of being proactive and asking these questions are twofold. 1, you will hopefully have the answers to things that can make the next 5 years a lot less stressful. And 2, you will look motivated, thorough, and professional to your new boss/advisor. So ask those questions and get those answers. You will be happy you did. And finally, the third thing to think about early on when you start your program is, wait for it, money? Right now you're like, wait, what? I've been accepted to a program, so I'll be getting paid with a stipend, so why do I need to think about money? Well, there are a few reasons. In some cases, your stipend will be coming from your advisor's commitment to the department that you will be a TA, or teaching assistant, to a class of undergrads. While this can be very rewarding and is honestly a great experience if you want to be a professor one day, it can also be time-consuming and take away from your research. Another reason is sometimes you are accepted to a program with only a promise of funding for a few years. This means that you will eventually need to work with your advisor on grant applications to solidify funding for the second half of your degree. And lastly, there are a significant number of fellowships available for first and second year PhD students, but much fewer for students more than 2 years into their program. So early on is when you need to think about applying for them. For STEM-based degrees, which, full disclosure, I am most familiar with, there are 2 big ones that all first-year students should apply for. The National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program, or the NSF GRFP, is one of the big ones. The second one is the National Defense Science and Engineering Graduate Fellowship, or NDSEG. In both cases, you can apply in your first and second years, which means you can try again if you don't get it the first time. And in general, there are some definite perks to being on one of these fellowships. For one, your stipend amount is generally higher than the standard department stipend, which doesn't suck at all. In most cases, there's also a chunk of money set aside from the fellowship specifically for you to travel to a conference of your choice, which is an amazing experience that all grad students should have. More on conferences in a later episode. And finally, having a fellowship attached to you gives you more freedom in your PhD journey. If, for some terrible reason, you and your advisor are not a good match, or you and your school are not a good match, and you don't think it's in your best interest to stick around for 5 years, you as a PhD candidate with fellowship funding become a very attractive student to other programs and advisors. You will find that your options increase significantly as far as other places you've applied since you come with your own funding. So ask around your department about resources for fellowships. Schools often have workshops specifically for fellowship season, since it benefits everyone if the students can win a fellowship early in their program. And also find some students who have applied in the past and ask them how their application was received and what they learned from the process. Then you'll be well on your way to getting that fancy funding from the government. All right, well, that's all for this episode. Thanks for tuning in. I hope I covered a few relatable tips to set you up for a good start to your PhD program. Remember to set yourself a good balance as far as your working schedule goes. Remember to put energy into developing a good relationship with your advisor up front. And definitely look into the money side of things and applying for fellowships early on. Quick preview for next week. I will have my first guest on to talk about her experience and what she's doing now. Dr. Mallory Kleitz was a colleague of mine at Drexel and is now working at the Department of Energy. I hope you tune in next week to hear our conversation. Please also subscribe and share with anyone you know who may want a weekly PhD Pick-Me-Up podcast. Follow us on Instagram at ImpactFactorPod and DM any questions you have and want me to answer in future episodes. Have a good week!